Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Sabrina Lozides Meredith, who says, Steve, I was watching a video on Secular Talk where they were talking about the Bernie wing, progressives, taking over the Democratic Party in an effort to get more votes. Do you think it's time for a shift to more progressive policies from the Democratic Party? Oh, absolutely, it's time for more progressive policies from the Democratic Party. In fact, it's past time. I would say it's going on 3 months past time. It's not just about winning elections. It's about pushing forward a progressive agenda and empowering progressives and making supporting progressivism an easier thing for Democrats to do. A few people asked in other comments about the Justice Democrats thing, and I think it's a great idea. I think the idea of running progressive candidates and trying to elect as many progressive members of Congress and senators in the next election as possible is a great idea. I think a lot of, if you go to the Justice Democrats website and you look at their platform, the issues that they support, the things that they stand for, a lot of that stuff is stuff that I have spoken about on this channel before, that a lot of progressives have talked about, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, women's rights, racial justice, gun control, gun regulation, just all kinds of really common sense and long overdue progressive stuff that I support wholeheartedly and would love to see real action on in 2 years, because it looks like we're not going to get anywhere with it, until at least 2018. So I think the Justice Democrats thing is great, and I think the idea in general of not only pushing progressive candidates for Congress in the future, but also pushing the Democrats who are there now to be progressive and to hold their feet to the fire and to let them know that we will support them if they support us, that if they back us up and they fight Trump and they fight the Republicans tooth and nail and they show that they are committed to fighting against Trumpism and to supporting and fighting for progressive causes and defending the rights of people who are now threatened by the Trump administration, that we will support them. But if they don't, if they capitulate, if they enable, if they collaborate, then we won't support them. Secular Scholar. Hey Steve, something I've observed is that most of the tension with Muslim peoples comes out of the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent, where in the case of the Indian subcontinent, colonialism has, and in the case of the Middle East, a sort of pseudo-colonialism still does, interfere in the sovereignty of the nations located there, primarily perpetrated by the West, with the U.S. being a very willing spearhead. If what many people were saying about Islam were true, that it teaches people to be suicide bombers, these tactics would have been used much earlier, and one of the primary words for such an attack would be something Arabic or Turkish or some other Middle Eastern language, rather than the Japanese word kamikaze. What I'm saying is that Islam is not the cause for ISIS or Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda, but the banner. What I'm asking is that while there is definitely problematic passages in the Quran and tenets of Islam, should we be looking at more secular political economic issues of these regions and attempt to help out with those problems to fight the terrorism that grows there, including admitting to our own involvement in how things developed in these regions? Well, the short answer to all of that is yes, I agree with you completely. And I think that the United States is certainly very, very derelict in its duty of acknowledging the role that we have played in destabilizing that region, in feeding the strains of fundamentalism and nationalism and tribalism that have led to the situation that we see in many Middle Eastern countries, the incredibly anti-Western view of many of the governments and also of many of the people, and the creation of an environment where terrorist networks, where groups like Daesh, the so-called Islamic State, and Al-Qaeda and its various splinter groups and sort of descendant groups have been able to take power and gain a great deal of influence and do a great deal of harm to people mostly in that part of the world, and also occasionally to people in Europe and in the United States. There are political motivations, there are economic factors, there are social and cultural and historical factors that play into the creation and the enabling, the creation of an environment that allows these sorts of organizations to come up and to recruit followers and to gain power that goes far beyond simply saying, well, Islam is just a violent religion, or Islam is cancer, or any of these other just asinine, simplified, ridiculous things that people, including some very loud and popular and vocal people on YouTube, love to say. This is just an Islamic thing. This is what happens when Islam is truly adhered to. These are the true believers of Islam, these violent terrorists. It's insulting to peaceful Muslims, to more moderate Muslims. It's insulting to the many, many, many times greater number of Muslims who are victims of groups like Daesh and the various terrorist networks. And it's reductive, and it's just not accurate to say, well, this is a Muslim thing. They're doing this because of their Islamic faith, and to act as though their Islamic faith and their interpretation of their texts and their interpretation and the way they practice and carry out their beliefs somehow occurred in a vacuum, that it wasn't influenced by other factors in their culture or in their lives or in their history. It's a really silly, ignorant thing to say. And I much prefer your interpretation, because I think that is more accurate, and I think that is more helpful and more likely to lead to fruitful results in the future. Justin Parallax. Hi, Steve. Got a question. As part of building myself back up following my nervous breakdown last year, I taught a workshop last week on symbolism in writing. It went fantastically. While throwing together some handouts, I was trying to illustrate that the meaning behind symbols is socially constructed. Trying to grab some quick videos off YouTube on socially constructed meanings brought a bit of a shock, though, because a quick search pulled up hundreds upon hundreds of opinion videos about why gender is not a social construct, all from non-academics, and I suspect from people who've never had the luxury of an education in the social sciences. How depressing. Growing up, I was always told that the idea that men liked one type of thing and women liked another was outdated, or that boys and girls could play with whatever type of toys they wanted. Yet here we are with a huge swath of videos that just seem to drag that process backwards. What are your thoughts on why there seems to be this kind of denialism about social construction in terms of gender identity? Where does it come from? Also, what's your favorite board game? That took a sharp turn at the end. I'll answer the last question first, and I guess based on the theme of the rest of your question, I should say something that's like defiant of gender norms, like Mystery Date is my favorite board game, or Mall Madness, or some other game that was like marketed to little girls. But no, the truth is it's Risk. Risk is my favorite board game. I think a lot of it is just ignorance, as you said. I think a lot of these folks do not even properly understand what social sciences are. And I think some of it is a response to the broadening of gender identity in the last few decades, and especially in this previous decade, with increasing visibility for trans folks, for gender nonconforming folks, for the idea that gender is not and should not be thought of as a male-female binary. These are all relatively new ideas to a lot of people. And there is some resistance to it. There are some people who just see that as something new and something different, and they just default to, oh, that's not the way it is. Everybody knows that there's boys and girls, and you have to be one or the other. All this is just nonsense. People are just making this up. And it's a shame, because, gender is a social construct. I don't know how, if you properly understand what is meant by social construct, I don't understand how you can say that gender is not a social construct. Gender is a concept that we created to help us talk about something, right? That we experience in our everyday lives, that we see in our everyday lives. It is a socially constructed concept, and it needs to be able to be malleable and to be changeable as our understanding of the thing it was created to describe broadens and deepens and becomes more complex. I think a lot of people use social construct as a synonym for made up, as though it doesn't exist, because a lot of the same people who insist that gender is not a social construct also say, for instance, race is a social construct. And they say that often to shut down comments or to shut down conversations about racism. They say, well, race is a social construct, so it's no point to even talk about racism. Essentially, race is a social construct, so in their minds, that means that race doesn't exist. And that also means that discussions about racism are pointless. Race is a social construct. So is gender. So is the idea of a species that we use. So the entire taxonomy that we use to identify and talk about different species of organisms. These are all social constructs. These are ideas that we thought up to help us better understand and categorize and speak about and articulate our findings and our knowledge of things that we encounter in our lives. They're social constructs. And they're imperfect. And they need to be changeable, they need to be malleable, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist or that they don't count. Or if you can say, well, if you can say that is a social construct, then therefore we don't have to talk about it. Or any concerns you have about it are irrelevant. It's a very serious misunderstanding of what a social construct is. Tristan Loves. Hi, Steve. Big fan. I am a non-binary trans woman. I use the term trans woman because I identify with many more of my female traits, but still don't consider myself male or female. Up until recently, I was a consumer of content from both sides of the fence. I would enjoy content from people like yourself, Christy Winters, Kat Black, and other similar creators, as well as the likes of Sargon of Akkad, The Amazing Atheist, Bearing, and so forth. I was pushed away from the latter genre recently after a horrible experience at a meetup hosted by an anti-feminist YouTuber, one I've heard you speak about several times. After having a minor disagreement with the YouTuber about the nature of biological sex, several of his fanboys descended on me, calling me horrible names, calling me delusional, and even spitting on me. Several times I pleaded for the YouTuber to come to my aid, but his reaction was to join in, chant horrible, dehumanizing slurs at me, and grope my private parts, gleefully screaming, "I love me some chicks with dicks," and other transphobic slurs. Absolutely crushed, I left the event immediately and was walking to my car when suddenly I was punched from behind and knocked to the ground. I was then kicked, spat on, urinated on, and verbally abused by 5 or more of the fanboys from earlier. This horrible experience has left me with PTSD and a crushing fear of leaving my house. My question is, do you think the YouTuber in this scenario can be blamed for the actions of his fanboys? I don't recall the YouTuber himself being involved in my physical assault in the car park, but his earlier actions could be considered inflammatory to the situation. I am interested in your opinion of this incident because it is a real-life parallel of the horrible abuse and dogpiling that occurs here on YouTube, which I've heard you speak out against several times. Also, now that I know that the other side of the fence is definitely not the place for me, do you think it is possible for me to be fully embraced on your side of the fence, or would I possibly be seen as some sort of defector? I appreciate your time and your thoughts. If you're unable to cover my question for whatever reason, I fully understand, and thank you for your wonderful content all the same. Regards, Tristan. Well, first of all, let me just tell you, I think what happened to you was awful, and I'm so sorry that you went through that, and I'm so sorry that you are suffering because of it in the aftermath. I think that's atrocious, and there's no excuse for that, and there's no excuse for the person who was the head of the meetup, this YouTuber that you refer to, tolerating that. I have never convened a meetup of my fans. I don't know if I ever would. I don't know if I would ever be popular enough to do such a thing. But if I did, I would certainly like to think that if one of the people who came to the meetup to meet me and to interact with other people who were fans of mine was being victimized, like you describe yourself being victimized, that I wouldn't just sit there and let it happen, and I certainly wouldn't participate in it. That's appalling, but sadly not all that surprising. The behavior that you described from the YouTuber, and I don't know who you're talking about, but it could be any one of dozens of people. That's the shitty part. And the people who were there joining in on the abuse of you, that's the sort of thing that is fostered. That's the attitude that is encouraged. by the tone of their videos, by the sort of ponage culture that is brought up, where skepticism and argument and debate is reduced to just making a response video to someone and pausing it every few seconds and just articulating your mindless disagreement with them, just being contrarian for the sake of it, and maybe throwing in some ad hominems and some insults and some mockery, and that's what they consider skepticism. That's what they consider intelligent discourse. It's disgusting. It's disgusting and pathetic and juvenile. As I think most people know, I moderate my comments. I screen every comment that is posted to my videos. I hold everything for approval by me. So if any, so the kind of abuse that takes place on other people's channels who don't moderate their comment sections or don't care does not happen here on this channel, and it won't as long as I'm doing this. I mean, I'm not going to allow my comment sections to be used to ridicule and abuse people, or to give, platforms, however small, to people who just want to troll and pick fights and just be assholes. So you're welcome here. You're welcome here. If you treat people with respect, then people will treat you with respect. And if people don't treat you with respect, then I will get rid of them. They won't be here. So you're welcome here. Radical Bacon. I don't particularly like the punching Nazis thing, but I don't find it as stomach-churning as police violence against black people. One of the reasons is it allows the Nazis to paint themselves as the beleaguered victims, and it also gives them a larger platform. I hadn't heard of this Spencer fuckface before this, and would be happy if I never saw his punchable face again. Whereas with black folk, there's this tension that they should not be seen or heard, especially when the police are around. But this entire election has been about how if one side goes high, the other side can go low and still win. A Nazi punching meme won't make us look good to the far right, but really nothing's going to. But if moderates see how much of a joke we make of Nazis, maybe it's a good thing. It's not just about constantly punching Nazis, it's about making it into a meme. I don't know, maybe I'm making too much out of this? No, I don't think you're making too much out of it. I think you're onto something. I think we feel very similarly on the subject. Yeah, it's not just about, well, if you see a Nazi, punch a Nazi. I think the point is to create a culture and create an environment where they don't feel welcome, where they don't feel at liberty to be open, bold hate mongers. I think that is ultimately the point. And mocking them, making it a meme, making Nazi punching a meme, making them an object of ridicule, robbing them of the legitimacy that they so desperately want and need in order to push their hateful and violent agenda, robbing them of that, making them punchlines, removing them from the mainstream that they have been able to creep into over the last few years, and particularly recently with the Trump campaign, taking that away from them, pushing them back into the corners, back onto the fringe of society, like just fringe-dwelling kook land. That's where they belong. That's the only place for them in a decent society. Entirely too much mainstream attention and space and legitimacy has been given to out-and-out bigots over the last couple of years, to white supremacists, to misogynists and rape apologists, to xenophobes, and in the case of Richard Spencer, to like flat-out fucking neo-Nazis. He's a skinhead with hair. That's who Richard Spencer is. And the sooner he can be shamed and scared away, and everybody else like him back into the shadows where they belong, the better. The better. And the sooner I get out of this round and get into the next round, the better. It's a little something I like to call
the lightning round.
Luke Lee. Steve, would you rather call Donald Trump a fucker or a silly fuck? I would choose silly fuck. Oh gosh, do I have to choose? I would actually choose fucker. Silly fuck makes him sound silly, makes him sound frivolous. And I don't want to make him sound silly or frivolous. I want to make him sound dangerous and harmful and malevolent. So I would not call him a silly fuck if I had to choose between the two. I would call him a fucker. Matt Helmers. Hey, Steve. Do you think Betsy DeVos will make America great again? I see what you did there, because she's completely unqualified for her post as Secretary of Education. That's funny. No, I don't. Lucas Hackett. Yo, Steve, in your honest opinion, which do you think was both the best and worst Royal Rumble of all time? And who did you cheer for to win this year's Royal Rumble? Actually, I did not watch this year's Royal Rumble because I am not watching WWE at all anymore while Donald Trump is president, because the McMahons supported Trump and gave him money, and they can go fuck themselves. So I didn't watch it. So I didn't root for anybody. I just didn't pay attention. Best Rumble ever was 1992 when Flair won the title. Worst Rumble ever for me was 99 when Vince won. Just an awful, awful Rumble. The fucking Vince Russo Rumble was just terrible. Yeah, that would be my pick. 92 is the best, 99 is the worst. I mean, for the most part, most Rumble matches are actually pretty good if you look back at all. There have been a few kind of stinkers, but most of the Rumble matches end up being pretty good. It's a good gimmick. Case Against Faith 1. Steve, what do you think about the current YouTube notification system? I really don't think much about it at all. Because I moderate all my comments now, and all comments to all my videos are held for approval by me now. So the notifications really don't play much of a role. In fact, I think I unsubscribed from all the email notifications because I'm going to see the comments anyway every time I check to clear the comments, so it doesn't make that much of a difference to me. Are there people who hate it? Is that like a thing? I haven't been paying attention. Are there people who really hate the notification system? Because I don't really pay it any mind. Miguel Ocampo. Hey, Steve, big time fan here. What is your initial thought now that the Dakota pipeline has been revised? I think you might mean revived there. I think it's a terrible idea. I think the pipeline in general, the whole thing from Canada all the way down, is a terrible idea and shouldn't happen. I think it's spending a lot of money and disturbing the environment and possibly damaging the environment in order to transport what should be a soon-to-be obsolete fossil fuel. I just think it's a terrible idea. And it's particularly a terrible idea in the Standing Rock situation, where you have the needs of a tribe of native people just being completely disregarded, essentially so that white people can make money, so that Westerners, so that non-native people can exploit their land and overlook their needs and ignore them and silence them and make money off of their land and endanger their land and their sacred spaces and their health and their environment so that Westerners, non-native people can make money. It's the same song. It's the same song it's always been since Europeans first came to the Americas. Fuck the natives so we can make some money. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. I'm completely against it. I'm completely on the side of the water protectors at Standing Rock. Malevolent Divinity. Quandary. I'm volunteering at a hospital, and one of the things listed as you might end up doing this is spiritual care, wherein it entails compassionate listening to people with respect to persons of all faiths, no faith, all religions, and all cultures. I'm pretty good at listening to people and not being a jerk, provided they aren't, and am somewhat well-versed in Christianity through a number of venues, including interesting ways of thinking about it on all different sides. And methinks perhaps they might be a little lacking in people who could more easily get along with those individuals with no faith. So's I wonder, right and proper idea or no? Oh, I think it's a great idea. You seem like you want to do it, and you seem like you'd be good at it. I think you should go for it. I think it's great. It would be good for you, I'm sure. It would be good for them to have someone to listen to. I'm sure people in the hospital, especially people who are in the hospital with like really serious ailments or serious conditions, could use an ear, could use a friendly face, could use someone to talk to. I think it's a great idea. You should do it. Methinks it's a good idea. You should do it. Skull Maris. In a recent 5 Things video, you mentioned that the state doesn't have the right to tell people what to do with their own bodies for the sake of the public good. Wouldn't this also mean that mandatory vaccination would also be prohibited? As someone who is pro-choice but also pro-vaccination, I find this line of logic a little troubling. What are your thoughts? Yeah, it's something I kind of go back and forth on. I think maybe the best idea would be to very strongly encourage vaccination. Have incentives to get people to vaccinate their kids, like the public school thing. Like kids aren't allowed to enroll in public school unless they have all of their vaccinations. I think things like that are, along with education and pushing back very, very hard against anti-vax rhetoric and anti-vax claims, making the strong, unequivocal case that vaccinations are good and vaccinations are something that you should get for your kids and there's no excuse not to do it. Send that message very strong and have incentives to sort of nudge people toward doing it, to make sure as many people do it as possible. That's probably the best way to go. Hey, that's it for the lightning round. That was the last question. It's time for the shout out. And as I mentioned last week, for a little while at least, I'm going to be doing the shout outs a little differently. Instead of shouting out another YouTuber or someone with an awesome podcast, I'm going to be shouting out causes that you can support if you want to throw some money or some volunteer time or some effort behind doing something positive during the Trump administration, during the years of challenge that we are likely to face here coming up. And the organization this week that I am recommending that you support, either financially or by just giving them a signal boost and sharing it around, or some other way that you see fit, is Amnesty International. And of course, they are a world famous organization already. They don't need any particular help from me, but given the anti-immigration, anti-refugee, anti-Muslim executive order that Trump released last week, and how that issue of immigration and refugees is foremost on the minds of many people, and has really yet again galvanized opposition against Trump and illustrated how important opposing him is and how important protecting the people he means to hurt is. I think Amnesty International is an organization that really, really deserves and needs support. They have recently said that they will fight the immigration order, that they stand with refugees and immigrants who are affected by the order, and they're just a great organization in general. You can go to amnesty.org to find out more, and I highly recommend that you do. And speaking of something that I highly recommend that you do, but in a completely different way, in a far less important way. This isn't like a humanitarian thing. The Amnesty International is a total humanitarian thing. Like do support Amnesty International and feel like you're doing good work and you're making the world a better place, right? That's what you do. And then maybe you reward yourself by listening to one of the Let Me Listen podcasts. See, it's frivolous. It's not as important as Amnesty International, but maybe it's nice to give yourself a little treat. And the Let Me Listen podcasts are a series of podcasts that are produced by my friend Jason Harding, aka Jason with a D, the puppet master of Opinionville here on YouTube. And there's a whole bunch of awesome Let Me Listen podcasts. There is, of course, the original Let Me Listen podcast, which is Let Me Finish, which is co-hosted by Jason and Finite Atticus. There is Filmtastic Voyage, hosted by Mike and Alex. There is Cinetific, the movie science podcast, hosted by Professor Jason and Professor Aaron. There's American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the hilarious improv comedy podcast. And then last but not least, there's the one that I'm in, which is why I always mention it last and make a much bigger deal about it than the other ones. And that is, of course, Late Seating, the movie review podcast that Jason and I co-host together, where we talk about classic films with a reputation of being either great or terrible, and we give them a fresh look and a fresh review, and we make fun of them a little bit for your entertainment, and we decide whether or not we think the movie deserves whatever its reputation is, whether that reputation is good or bad. And our new episode goes up today, the very day that this video is published, Friday, and it is a review of the classic movie musical Singin' in the Rain, which is actually a movie that neither Jason nor myself had seen before we did this review. So you get our hot take on Singin' in the Rain. And you can listen to that episode of Late Seating. You can listen to all of the past episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the awesome Let Me Listen podcasts by going to letmelistenpodcast.com. And I don't think you'll be sorry. That's it for me, everybody. I'm starting to ramble, so it's time to go. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions. If you have a question for next time, please leave a comment on this video and ask me your question for the next You Had to Ask video, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So please do leave a comment on this video and ask. Nothing is too serious, nothing is too silly, and I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until the next video, take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing before I go. Thanks once again for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/SteveShives to become a patron. You can pledge as little as $1 a month. If you pledge a little bit higher at like $5 a month or $10 a month or $20 a month, you get some cool perks on top of supporting the Patreon campaign. It's a really cool thing. I really appreciate all the support. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider supporting the Patreon campaign, and I'll see you next time.